So, good evening and welcome to Dusty Feet. It's May 5th, 2023, and we have another one of our special series, The Sons of the Father. As you know, we're continuing our discussions on The Chosen, right? Created by Dallas Jenkins. And we're beginning season two, with episode one, Thunder. So, during our time, right, my dad, John Wern, my brother, Jim Wern, and myself will be chatting about things in each episode that have impacted us along our journey. So, welcome to the Sons of the Father. And we have Outside the Class. It's a bit different. We expect you to watch the reference material before we start chatting about it. It's kind of like homework. I link all the videos for each week in advance on the dustyfeet.com on the Outside the Class page. Those videos premiere every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. In the description below are links to all of the audio, video, and source documents that we use here in the Dusty Feet. We want to make sure that any material we use here is properly credited to those folks who work so hard to bring it to us. Without their efforts, the learning we do here does not happen. Don't forget to subscribe. Click that bell icon if you want a reminder. And as always on the Dusty Feet, this is a place we can safely explore the endless ways of God and interconnection of His creation. Where belief understandings may be challenged, divine misunderstandings may exist, and traditional teachings might falter as we pursue connection, context, and community with God and each other here in an environment of grace and love. So here we go with some more Sons of the Father on the Dusty Feet. And here we are again, the Sons of the Father. But again, I want to reference this up front, like we have in the past, that sometimes issues can arise from discussions like these and the assumptions that we have on y'all listening. It is always unintentional, but if you don't understand or have questions concerning something that we've discussed, please feel free to comment down below and we'll respond as best we can. Or you can just send an email to bob@thedustyfeet.com, and sometimes it's just a more private way to bring up the questions. So, with that, season 2, episode 1, Thunder.
Yep.
Interesting. Daddy O, what hit you?
A lot. I think the title Thunder kind of gives us an idea of what it was going to be. It's packed with information, a better picture of who he's gathering around him, and, and I thought a lot of humor, even some from Jesus, which
Mhm.
you just don't see or hear in any place that I've ever heard him talked about. And it's really, I think that's what, again, that's what attracts people to it is when they know how a person ordinary. And that this is a real picture of the way the series to me is moving forward.
Gotcha.
The
Mm.
opening is at first it's a bit confusing because Peter starts off with gray hair, and you're is it John that's interviewing everybody? Not yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
um, and yeah that and he's asking them questions about what how their ideas of how Jesus impacted them and what what I again saw interesting is the uniqueness of how he drew each one of them to himself, and you
Mm,
see that when they respond. Uh,
Mhm.
everyone was unique, and in real life, my experience is the same way. The way that he approached me, the way that he drew me to himself, was very different than the way he drew both of you, the way he drew your mother, the way he drew some of the very
mm,
close friends, and then people I just asked them about their lives. How did you come to know Christ? And when they tell me, I think if that was me, no way would he made it to second base on that kind of approach. And that again shows how he feels about each one of us is created very uniquely, and all of that. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. And the second thing, and then I'll pass it off to Jim. I really like the way that James and I get him confused. Who was plowing the field with
James
James?
and
Big
John.
James.
James and John.
Okay,
James
it
and
was
John.
John. That's okay. That's what
Yeah.
I thought. And they're just, I mean, I think at Tarzan, movies on beating their chest and screaming out loud. We're the guys, man. We're the bomb. We're the in crowd. I mean, they said it, and who knows what he's making this for? It must be somebody important because he's uh, giving us the important jobs. And that's as we go
Mhm.
on in the episode, we see that they're all kind of brought down a peg or two to how he really draws all of us to himself, and there aren't any special uh, people. He loves us all, as Mary said in the very beginning. No, he loves us all. He loves you
Mhm.
all the same. So
Mm.
anyway,
Mhm.
that's where I'm going to leave it for now.
Okay. James. James, the son of John. Ha! Okay,
Yes,
never mind.
I was just going to say that. The way you said
Sorry.
that, it had that
Steal your
feel.
thunder. There you go.
It was a powerful episode
Mhm.
that set a good tone for, I think, what the season will be like. I'm looking forward to
Mm.
it for sure. Things that stood out to me were, Pop, I think you mentioned, there was a lot of humor in this one, Jesus in particular, and that was fun to see. I think this is the first time we saw Jesus get angry also. So
Get
we got to
miffed a
see
little
him.
bit. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, he got upset with James and John, and the way that it was interesting to watch because I mean he was obviously miffed, but then he brought it right back around again and cracked another joke shortly after, to lighten it, to help them understand
Mhm.
the seriousness of what they were thinking about. That they were wanting to
Mm.
judge these Samaritans, and yet he also said to them, you're criticizing these Samaritans who are believing without seeing miracles. Everybody else, it's because of the miracles that they're starting to pay attention. That was convicting.
Mm.
What kind of faith do I have? Do I have to see God do something extraordinary in order for me to believe who he says he is? That was good. I think
Mm.
the other part that stood out to me when Jesus was talking to the Samaritan man who was the guy that beat up the Samaritan in the story of the Good Samaritan. I love how Dallas flipped that upside down, Bob. You said it, kind of turns it on end.
Yeah.
And we don't see that one coming. But
Yeah.
when he's sitting there in his house talking to him, and he's like, tell me your story. And the guy's like, you don't want to hear my story. And he said, no, stories are very important.
Mhm.
They're what unite us. They're what bring us together. That was huge because that's what Dallas is doing, I believe, with this series is he's
Mhm.
he's turning these Bible stories into something more relatable to us so that we connect with it.
Mhm.
And Jesus is, and really, if you look at biblical culture, historical culture, forget just Bible, that's the way history was communicated, was through story.
Mhm.
And
Mm,
it was
Mhm.
for thousands and thousands of years, it
Mhm.
was all oral tradition.
Right.
It was all orally communicated because people didn't read. And
Yeah.
we lose that, I think. And sometimes we've taken that. And I loved what he did with tying Jesus into the word, the word made flesh,
Mhm.
because, here are the Pharisees who, last episode, I believe it was, where he said, the law is God. And that's where the Jewish faith had
yeah.
taken it. And here Jesus is trying to bring it back around to, and John
Mhm.
capitalizes on that the word is flesh, the
Mhm.
word is human. And Jesus even said, I'm a man,
Mhm.
and reminded us of that
Mhm.
in this episode. So there was a whole lot more there. I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah.
Bob, you chime in on what connected with you.
Here, hold on. Let me click my note here. Um, the uh, the beginning is interesting. I'll be intrigued to see if we loop around back to there somewhere
Mm-hmm.
somehow. It'll be interesting to see how they set it up because the actors will be just a little bit different years,
Mm-hmm.
a couple years down the road, whenever that particular event happens. Um, but John being John and how he's gathering his stuff is interesting. Because James and John um, end up being obviously as an apostle, they're set apart people, anyways, right?
Right.
But you realize that John is John who ends up writing a couple apostolic letters along with his
Mm-hmm.
gospel, right? And then he's the one that gets the revelation from the messenger from Jesus about
Mm-hmm.
the end, right? And James becomes the head of the Jerusalem council.
Right.
So he's the one that's head of the council of 70 that's there in Jerusalem right after Jesus departs. And he's the guy that's involved with that group that keeps Paul accountable. So their involvement in that community is definitely deep, and it will go for
A long time. Yep.
yeah. Paul was 90 when he died, something like that. Yeah, so which makes him old. Um, but which kind of gives you the point that they're probably around the ages in their deal. It's a fascinating deal because he wrote the Revelation is like 90 AD ish, and then who knows long after that he lived on
Mm-hmm.
Patmos until he died. Yeah. Um, the um, the Samaritan scenario on this is huge, and it's all over the place. And you get the the interactions, and you really start to see cracks in the relationships
Yeah.
amongst the group. There's still a lot of in squabbling and and bits that are
Mm,
going on. The Matthew Simon thing continues to raise its head,
Mm-hmm.
and it's doing its thing, and then the guys bantering back and forth, and the majority of it's based on what we do, which is about control.
Yeah.
They want control, and Jesus going, we'll do what we do, and we'll go where we go. That sounds good, right? That sounds good for ministry, right? But
Mm-hmm.
the guy sitting in between us had ministry that traveled, and tell me a time where he took off and didn't plan. Didn't happen. Okay. So I'm not necessarily convinced that that's bad. It's what's your focus during the plan. Fair?
Yeah.
You know, um,
mm.
and that's kind of important because it sounds like, yeah, you don't need to plan to do that. And I'm like, okay, let's talk about practicality in life and see how far that gets us. Yeah. Um, Especially that. Um, we'll see at the end if we have time to chat about the lost sheep. That's a deeper talk. Okay, maybe we won't be able to get there. But I liked the discussion with Ramey's father,
Father.
Kafni.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and a very honest. It's one, I don't have any time. Two, we got to do, and three, it's going to be short and sweet. I say my point, and then when he tells him that, he said, "That's all I have
Yeah.
is my honesty." You
Mm-hmm.
know, and the fact that he knows in that world of very much a barter and trade, give and take, where reputation and lineage is everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so he realizes the reputation that Jesus gave to his vineyard with the miracle, right,
Mm-hmm.
with the wine, was impactful to him. But he wasn't ready to make the stretch to,
Right.
on everything that they said had happened. All
Right.
he saw was the result. He was willing to admit the result. He wasn't there for the other one. But you saw, I thought Dallas did a good job with the actor with this playing Jesus, is to catch the angst in his face
Mm-hmm.
as he's desperately sharing this and he's realizing that he's still struggling with who he is.
Right.
And it's not like Jesus jumps down and starts, "What do you mean you don't believe me? What do you mean? What do you think I did with the wine? What do you think?" He could have gone into this big tirade, right? He could have gone
Mm-hmm.
this big deal because you are benefiting from this. But he doesn't do it. He backs off there. And the other point where he backs off is, again, at the end with James and John, with the Samaritans, where they go and get very bold towards
Mm-hmm.
Jesus and they want to go back at him. And Jesus stops him. And that's the point where you see him get angry.
Yeah.
But he's not angry at the Samaritans.
No.
It's not them.
Yeah.
He's angry at his own, which is it's a microcosm of a lot of how God deals with this stuff. You really don't see, and let's be fair, in scripture stories, not a lot of dealing with Rome,
Yeah.
you know, um, except for Egypt, where he's setting the tone to pull his people out. Other than that, doesn't go back and do anything. You don't see him doing all things around the deal. He clears land and does that. It's not about going outside the borders, it's about dealing with his people. And he holds them very accountable for their actions and what they do. And so it just hit one of those points. And I thought that was an important point to that angst, right, was pointed back at the group, not at the guys doing the deal. So, Daddy,
Well, even
yeah, go,
well,
Jim,
hang on.
go.
Even when he's talking to the dad, and he says, "No, I'm not a father." And
Yeah.
it's like, "Well, wait. Oh, it's true. He's not. He's a son."
Mhm.
And his just that again, it's a glimpse of that side of Jesus that John even brings out when he writes his gospel, of Jesus's acknowledgement of, I only do what the Father tells me to do. He's very much in submission to the Father.
Right.
And he was reflecting that with this father, saying, "You're right, I'm not a father, and I respect your decision in that."
Yeah.
Yes, it broke Jesus' heart, and you could see that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he wished that wasn't the case. But that's the reality.
Yeah.
And
He
that was,
respects a lot of the other characters and their choices.
yeah.
Dad, what did you think of when they went to the house and
Um,
yeah, with
well, there's a one thing I want to jump on before we get to
oh, go ahead.
that,
Okay.
which is the house was now which house are you talking about? The Samaritan's house or the big house?
The big house.
Yeah, when he wanted to go in the room with the ghosts. Yeah, we'll get there.
But
Just,
there's a whole
just that,
interaction with that, and again, it ties into
yeah,
Jimmy.
that's
So
just the
go.
way he
Yeah.
weaves everything through there it's classic to me. But what I thought was interesting was when Jesus was fixing the cart.
Hmm.
Now he could have been out preaching, But no, he's fixing the cart. He's underneath talking with this one guy, and the guy's, you ought to come to town and open up a shop. You're going to make a fortune. It's, oh, not a bad idea. Uh, but sometimes we get that way. And I remember traveling with Johnny, and we were going to Ghana. We were in Ghana, and she was getting invited to all kinds of places to go. And what we ended up going to the AIDS hospital there, which was
Mm.
big because AIDS over there in Ghana, they believe if you have sex with a virgin, you'll it'll cure your AIDS. So
Wow.
the guys, anyway, she gets in there and she goes in and just sits and talks with this one gal. She was 22 years old, something like that,
Mm.
very young, dying. I mean, she was
Mhm.
dying. There
Yeah.
wasn't no saving her. And Johnny spent an hour with her. The rest of us in the lobby. We're not going in there. And that's just the way that Jesus was setting an example for us. But what do you want to do with your life? Well, how do you want to act with that? And um,
Mhm. Yeah.
then of course at the home. Um, but going back to Rama's father, and as you guys said, the customs were very different, and he was very emotional over letting his daughter go.
Yeah.
Making sure this guy's going to take good care of her.
Mhm.
And I remember back, and I'll bet you guys can remember too. I wanted to meet the girls that you dated. I wanted to meet them before you went out with them. Their mothers didn't care about meeting you. Now your mom
Mm.
wanted, but I wanted to meet him. And it's maybe it was a little corny, but at the same time, I thought that was just being respectful to her, to know that I uh,
Mhm.
wanted to meet her and to feel that there's somebody that's looking over their relationship.
Mhm.
And I think that that's something that we've gotten away from with the freedom now that everybody, I'm 14 years old and I don't want you telling me. And I think that down deep inside, as you get older, you start realizing why your parents did certain, at least I do for sure,
Mm.
thinking about why my parents did some things that at the time was just screaming at me.
Mhm.
And I look back at it now and I think, oh my gosh, that's just beautiful. And so, moving right along, we're going to the house, and and he meets him at the door. the the woman at the well's husband meets him at the door and starts right away with putting it on him. Only got 5 rooms, and some of them are drafty, and it just it's just. And he said, I really liked the way he said, you even made me friendlier, when he was
Yeah.
talking about Jesus and his talking. And in that gruffness that was hiding his. Do you remember him standing on his porch overlooking when Jesus was speaking to the
Mhm.
crowd?
Mhm.
Mhm.
And he's just into it, just looking down,
Yeah.
listening.
Mhm.
And that's the way uh, you've both spoken to groups before, and and I was speaking at the church I go to not long ago, and when it was all over, there was some people I looked at and I thought, they're really getting this. And afterwards, then nothing. But somebody I never even saw walks up to me and starts talking to me about how God used what I said
Mm.
to impact their life. And that you never know
Mhm.
who
No,
you're
you don't.
impacting, because
Mhm.
that's the beauty of God, being available for God to use. My
Mhm.
house is yours. My meager whatever is yours.
Mhm.
And it's an amazing, wonderful thing to know that that's the way God is. He uses
Mm.
anybody he wants to, anytime he wants to, and hallelujah for that, because he used me the least of anybody I ever thought would ever be used by God. So
Mhm.
Hmm.
anyway, thank you for letting me share.
There you go.
Thanks for sharing.
Thanks for sharing. Um, so in the house, when he tells his which room's haunted, he says, "That's my mother-in-law. It's haunted." Jesus says, "Ooh, I want that one."
I want that room.
And James goes, it would bother him. He goes, "Might me," kind of. It was great.
Yeah.
So he ends up. James and John end up in the room
Hmm.
with Jesus, and he wakes up in the morning, and he goes, "It's not haunted," and so it's James had asked, "Why didn't you correct him?"
Right.
And it was one of the things that you see a lot of in this, and this happened to be a very pointed point to address it. Is that I'm not here to address everything or to correct everybody on every little thing. That's
Hmm.
not that's not my purpose. Very much bigger picture. We'll sort that stuff out. That sorts out in the wash. Tends to. Um, but it was a moment where he got a chance to teach them that I'm not going to sit there and start nitpicking who believes
Hmm.
what on that, and that was an important point, which then translates to their moment that they have with the
Hmm.
Samaritans and him again correcting them. The moment that we see of a little a little chutzpah. There's a little
Yeah.
Jesus is, you know, because he turns, it's it's the dual arms. He puts the arms out to hold them back,
Hmm.
and then he turns around. He
Mhm.
looks at them, drops his arms, and then instead of um, like I said, taking the point to take exception of what the Samaritans had just said, that he goes back to them and said, "Really,
Yeah.
really." And then the joke that he said, then the humor, like too soon
Yes.
with the Samaritan,
Uh-huh.
too too
Exactly.
too soon. It's get down the road, get going, because who knows what dangers might be along the road.
Hmm.
So there, James and John, where the where it and there's just a lot of um those moments where he's starting to identify with his people. More emotion you get from him.
Yeah.
I marked again the humanness of the interactions.
Hmm.
Um, and not everything goes, like you said, with Coffnees, that one of the examples, not everything goes Jesus's way. We have the Samaritans in there that are bitter because he's Jewish, not because he's Jesus. They don't know who he is. They could care less who he is. He's just a Jew to them. They're not
Yeah.
rejecting Jesus. They're just disrespecting people in general. It's a different thought.
Mm.
Hmm.
It is. Yeah, there was so much to do it, and our element for control, James and John again, is about control. So anything else? So Daddy-O, any last wrap up?
Well, I just, when Jesus stopped James and John, and I don't think he was angry. He was just disappointed. Um, did Jesus ever save you from doing something you would have been really sorry about? Because that's what he was doing. They would have been very sorry if he'd have just let him go and then let him, get to feel the consequences of that.
Yeah.
Because it was a lose lose. There was no winning in that situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I just have to ask all of us in our lives, when did Jesus stop you from doing something? He might not have. It's just saying, I can't do this, God. This is wrong,
Hmm.
and I didn't do it. And I look back, and I at the time, you don't know, or I didn't know why I didn't do it. I just didn't do it. Now I can see that Jesus and I don't know if that's still small voice. I
Mhm.
don't know, but I know that I was leaning towards doing something I would have been very, very sorry that I had
Hmm.
done. And he saved me from that. And those are the kinds of things that I pray that I will continue not to do,
Yeah.
and that anybody who's watching or listening would feel just to look for those times when you know that if Jesus was standing there, you'd never do what you were thinking about
Yeah.
doing.
Mhm.
Hmm.
James.
Had a chance this week in a technology all hands call for the company. They brought in a guest speaker, Keith Ferrazzi. He's an author. He's a consultant for corporations and wrote a book called Never Eat Alone. And he was talking about building teams and the power of sitting around in a casual setting and what kind of interaction and how much more impact you have in those, unguarded times. And
Mm.
I know where he got the example. He got it from Jesus because that's what Jesus. I mean, you look at even the teachings that we see in the New Testament that Jesus did were oftentimes in an informal setting. And you saw him at the table, and you saw him in the house, and he's talking to people, and it's that um, informal place where people feel safer, less guarded. You go into a teaching and you're immediately like, okay, what am I going to learn? And here he's just off the cuff talking, and that's where stuff goes in. And it just reminded me that it's just very powerful to have discussions around a meal and what God can do in those times.
Yeah. No, it's uh, there. There are huge points in this, and we see that, and I totally agree. We've got, um, except for the few recorded large teachings that we
Hmm.
have, Sermon on the Mount and the two feedings, right?
Hmm.
You're right. The vast majority is very intimate and very uh, connected. And then so
Yeah.
we see Dallas in this. We're seeing the humanness of those moments, you know,
Right.
um, and uh, and and the impact of those other thoughts. Daddy, I'll take that with James and John when he's talking to them in anger. He goes, even as he's lightening up, he goes, "You wanted to call down fire from heaven
Yeah,
on those guys, you know," and then he
Hmm.
says, That thing we talked about earlier in the
Hmm.
house, right?
Hmm.
Maybe we're not there yet.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a little more that needs to play out before I give
little
you
more
any of
work.
that power.
Yeah.
And I find that interesting. And maybe on a cautionary tale, maybe that's some of the reasons why things don't happen the way we think scripture sometimes says things might happen. Let's put it that way.
Hmm.
And we don't.
Yep.
And I'm wondering if
Yeah.
maybe uh, Dallas took a great point to maybe throw something back at ourselves, which
Yeah.
I think is part of the deal, and why I think he and his writing team together as a whole um, do a great job of helping us stretch these stories. Um,
Yep.
Yeah.
like I said, to invert the um, the Good Samaritan and having dinner with the Samaritan side of the equation
Right.
was again the big impact moment in
Yeah.
the show, so to speak. So um, we'll wrap this up, and uh, next week we'll hit season 2 episode next session. We'll do
Yes.
season 2 episode 2, which we'll continue to have fun. This season already said this was a start. We told us this is going to take us places. It'll be
Yep.
fun. So thanks for being here, gents, and we'll pick up again. So our point to ponder. Going to stick on this one. I think it's a biggie here. And again, we challenge ourselves with this um, been selected as best or most appropriate. And when you see the struggle that we're seeing in this, with in this one, it happened to be with James and John, where we're seeing that this particular point of most appropriate, and we see this struggle with the disciples in the group settings when they're talking. That we question this, and yet at the same time, we embrace it. So let's stick with the chosen, and I'll stick that we're chosen too. So, with that, thanks for being with us tonight on another Sons of the Father on the Dusty Feet.